Good evening, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the 4th webinar in the Science Behind Animal Behavior series, where we'll be learning about the behavior modification of dog aggression. To those who joined us yesterday, a very warm welcome back. To everyone else, a very warm welcome. In case you didn't catch part 1 of the webinar yesterday, we will introduce our speaker, Mike Shikashio, once more. Mike is a Certified Dog Behaviour Consultant working exclusively with dog aggression cases through private consultations. He was the past president of the International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants, or IAABC, is fully certified through the IAABC, and is a full member of the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, or APDT. He is sought after for his expert opinion by numerous media outlets, such as the New York Times, and is a featured speaker at many conferences, universities, and seminars around the world. He offers a variety of workshops, webinars, and online courses on the topic of canine aggression, including the Aggression in Dogs Master Course, and also hosts the popular podcast show, The Bitey End of the Dog. We are hence very excited to have him as our speaker at our webinar today. Before we begin, a gentle reminder to mute your microphones and post any questions that you may have to the user named Q&A. This can be done throughout the session. Thank you. Mike, please.
Thank you, and welcome back, everybody. I'm going to go to sharing my screen here, get that set up, and we should be good. All right, so this is day 2 of understanding dog aggression and their overall prognosis. Yesterday, we left off on the prognosis, which is the potential outcome we expect in an aggression case based on these number of components. We went through if you missed yesterday, you'll be able to catch up on the recording, I'm sure. But we went through some of the items on what I look at for objective points to assess for overall outcome, what we can expect for an overall outcome based on a number of variables. So we left off at training history, sort of the dog's training background, how much training they've had, how much foundational skills. And I also wanted to mention that sometimes if the dog has had a history of really heavy-handed or poor training, or, depending on the context, that can impact, of course, how the case could go with me. A good example is sometimes I will come into the case as the 3rd trainer or 4th trainer, and maybe the client's experienced some, training that is different than the methods I use, or there's a different methodology, and sometimes that dog has a real negative association with trainers, especially male trainers. If I'm going in as maybe the 3rd male trainer, sometimes you walk into the house and the dog's like, oh, wait a second, I'm not a fan of these guys coming over and training me. So it can make it more difficult for me as far as the amount of the relationship I'm going to be able to establish with the dog, how quickly I'm going to work with the dog, how dangerous it can be for me sometimes. So sometimes that can work for and against you as far as their training history. Just something to be aware of, especially if you are a trainer and you are coming in later on in a case. All right, so let's talk about the response to behavior modification. And what that means is how well does the dog adapt to the training, and how fast are we seeing behavior change in that case? And much depends on what the client's goals are and setting expectations. So we talk about what success looks like. We talked about that yesterday, but we sometimes have to determine just how much the client is going to commit. So some cases I might go in, I'm there once, and it's often just a management scenario and some very basic behavior change strategies, and sometimes it requires many sessions. And if those many sessions we're seeing slow behavior change or no behavior change, or in some cases if it gets worse, that's obviously not good for overall prognosis, because the client is not going to feel very hopeful if they're not seeing behavior change. So and each dog is different. Each dog is going to be different, and just how much we're going to be able to modify their behavior, just like people. So if I have a case where I'm there many sessions, that's going to be often difficult for the client to grasp and continue moving forward in the case. That last one there is my completely unscientifically labeled term for the warm-up factor, and that's a big one for me to assess. Is how long does it take for the dog to establish a nice relationship with me? So I can go there sometimes first session, first few minutes, and I'm tossing treats to the dog that might be barking at me at first, and then after a few minutes the dog's like, this guy is great, no problems with him. But then some cases I could be there multiple sessions, 3, 4, 5 sessions, and the dog is barely, starting to feel comfortable with me, has a very slow warm up factor. So they take a lot longer to become to be okay with me in their home. And of course, if you are there as the trainer and it's taking that long, it can be, sort of squashing the client's overall hope, because if the trainer can't make a relationship with their dog, how is anybody else going to? So it's a significant variable to assess in the overall prognosis, just how long it takes for that dog to establish a relationship with people or other dogs or whatever it is that you're trying to work around. And that's if that's the goal. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to say, okay, your dog has to say hi to other dogs or people, but it is something to assess if that's one of the goals. Okay, next up is the legal history. Now, this is a little different maybe than, I'm not sure of the laws in Singapore, but I'll give you what typically happens in the United States as far as when dog bites happen. It's going to differ depending on which state you live in, but it's definitely something to consider in the overall prognosis. Here in the States, depending on which state, if the dog has one bite, sometimes they call that the one bite rule, and the dog is kind of given a pass, and then any other bites can result in more severe consequences. And those consequences can be wide ranging depending, again, on the jurisdiction. They could be anywhere from just civil fines all the way on up to destruction orders for the dog and criminal charges for the owner in some cases. So there is that to consider. So if the dog already has a bite or has something on record, the more bites, of course, the dog has on record, the more difficult it is for overall prognosis. And the reason why, of course, is that the potential risks for outcome are very negative if the dog bites again. But it also makes the client much more often risk averse. So they're very concerned about, obviously, the next potential bite and what could happen to them or their dog. So the management has to be much better. And sometimes the management is so severe that it, again, impacts the dog's quality of life. So lots to consider when there is a legal history, and the more strikes against the dog from a legal standpoint, the more difficult the case typically. All right, so next up is the medical history. So we talked yesterday about how medical issues can be a contributing factor to aggressive behavior, and the medical component is something to assess in the overall picture, because if you have a dog with a lot of medical issues that are contributing to the aggressive behavior, we have to usually address those first. So if you've got a dog with multiple medical issues, that could be having, the dog's got maybe hip dysplasia, and it's got hypothyroidism, and it's got Cushing's, and different things that can impact behavior. That's going to be more difficult of a case, because clearly we have to address those issues as well as the behavior change, which requires more time, more resources from the client, and hopefully the dog does get better from a medical standpoint. So dogs with a lot of medical issues contributing to the aggressive behaviors are typically more difficult for overall prognosis. Next up is the risk assessment. And this matters for everybody in terms of not only my clients, but anybody who's in a rescue or shelter institution, kind of making those decisions on the overall outcome. You have to be looking at the overall risk and what your risk tolerance is as a pet owner or an organization. It's going to differ, and sort of what your ethics are. But I think in terms of the entire industry, we do have to think ethically about which dogs we're going to continue to work with and which dogs may not be safe for society. So for the family alone, where I'm looking at risk to other family members if the dog is biting. So clearly, if there's children in the home that have been bitten, we have to assess that risk. What's the overall potential impact? What are the severity of the bites? What's the psychological or emotional impact, especially? So whenever kids are involved or children are involved, I am extremely careful. I don't take every single bite case for children. I'll often go right to saying that dog needs to be rehomed, or we have to consider other options because it's just too risky and dangerous for the children in the home. Because it can have a great impact on kids, the emotional aspect. I'm sure many of you know somebody that's been bitten when they were a child and they're afraid of dogs later on, or worse, they have some trauma involved. So we have to consider that. I also look at senior members in the home. So if there's, mom or dad have moved into the home or something like that, and the dogs are fighting with each other, it can get dangerous because they can be in the middle of a dog fight. So we have to kind of look at that in terms of the family aspect. Then you look at the more of the community in general, so neighbors. If you have a dog or you live in a neighborhood where there's lots of off-leash dogs and your dog is dog aggressive, that you have to consider, especially if your dog is doing a high level of damage to other dogs. Um, from a sheltering and rescue aspect, you also have to think about, you know, is this dog going to be safe to be out in society? And a great question to ask to determine that is, would I be okay with this dog living right next to me? So next to my family, next to my kids, and next to my pets. Would I be okay with this dog moving in next to me? And if their answer is yes, then that's probably a good, you're probably looking at a dog that is suitable for a community environment. But if the answer is, well, I would never want this dog living next to me because it is very dangerous, I'd be worried about my own dogs or my children, that you would want to think about the ethical impacts. So I definitely talk about risk assessment with my clients, and of course the liability. Being in the United States, liability is a very common thing when dogs bite, and the lawsuits can get quite high. I think the national average here jumped from around $18,000 for a dog bite lawsuit all the way up to around 50,000 now. And I've worked with clients where the lawsuits are in the six figures, $300,000 lawsuits for dog bites. So there is that to consider as well. All right, next up is the family dynamic. If you have a couple of members of the family and they're not agreeing, or members in your organization that aren't agreeing, that can happen sometimes too. It's really difficult because somebody maybe wants to keep the dog and really work with the dog, and maybe one of the other family members doesn't want to do it or doesn't really care for the dog, or worse, they could be afraid of the dog, which is clearly not fair for the person in the home. And that's something as trainers and consultants that are listening in to assess for, because you might, let's say, get contacted by a client and they're like, yeah, I want to work with my dog. It's, going after my partner. And the next thing you know, you get to the home and the partner is just deathly afraid of that dog. You have to think about that is it really fair for that person or that child sometimes to continue working that case? Maybe it's a better option to rehome that dog to another place. So assess for that. If there's many family members involved too, all of them have to be on the same page, at least for management strategies. So making sure the front door is shut instead of just letting the dog charge out on the street and those kind of little things. But if you have many family members, it gets more difficult. And then if multi-dog homes, especially when a couple moves in together and they each bring their own dog and then the dogs start fighting, that can be very difficult because clearly sometimes people are going to play favorites for their own dogs. I'll tell you a funny story. I had this one couple. This gentleman hired me to train his poodle at the time. This was over a decade ago, so this is when I was doing some more basic training as well. And the I get to the home and I met his wife, and the wife was just really, really being nasty to him. Like, you're a stupid dog, you're so stupid, and you're a stupid dog, your dog's not gonna learn anything. And she was just really, really just being very, very nasty to him. And it was difficult for me to even get into any training or talk to them because they would just keep going at each other. You're stupid, and they would be fighting like the whole thing. So I'd be like, okay, guys, so we're gonna do this next. So clearly, I had a real significant struggle between the clients agreeing on anything, which doesn't necessarily mean good. It's good for prognosis. Fortunately, that wasn't an aggression case. So I ended up training the dog. Things went okay, but then I get a call from this client about 5 years later, and he's now has Dobermans, and the Dobermans were having some scuffles with each other. And I go to the home, new home. He got into a new home, thinking like there's no way he's with the same woman. And then I get there, and they're still together, and she's like, "Oh, hey, Mike, and look at my lovely Dobermans. Aren't they so great? They're so smart." And she completely changed. And I was thinking to myself, you guys must have had a really good marriage counselor because it's such a shift in their relationship. But it doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes the couple's in disagreement, and that's not good for the overall picture. Okay, resources. This is, of course, something for both pet owners and organizations, and how much resources they can commit to something. Here in the U.S., I work with shelters or humane societies where it is one person managing a group of 50 dogs, or the staffing is very low, and there's very little amount of time for training, let alone any kind of behavior change strategies. It's often just a lot of management. And then you have on the other side, I've worked with places where there's a board of directors and a staff of 5 all living on property, and there's one dog. So there's these big extremes, and that's going to be dependent on, much of that is going to depend on the overall outcome for the dog, because clearly the more finances somebody has, or organization or pet owner, the more they're going to be able to do for the dog if they're willing to commit to it. Time is also another resource that we have to assess. Does the client or organization have enough time to work on the behavior issue? If not, of course, that's going to be more difficult for that case. The availability of ancillary services. So again, some places I go in the States, there's very little in terms of behavior resources. There's very little in terms of veterinary resources. Veterinary behaviorists may not be in that local area. The nice thing about all of this pandemic is now that a lot of them are doing much more remote work, but still there's quite a shortage of qualified help in certain pockets of the country. And you might experience the same in your area, in certain locations where it's more difficult to get help. So that's something to consider in the overall picture, just how much, in case you need some of those things, how much is available. Okay, and next thing, of course, is the participation of the client. This is both from, again, your pet owner or your adopters that are adopting the dogs that might have a history of aggression, that they have to be committed to working with the dog and managing the dog. All of you that work with training know this. Any of you that have been to a gym and started a workout plan understand this. Anybody that's been on a diet and tried to lose weight understand this necessary need for participation. And I like the word participation because compliance, we used to call it owner compliance or client compliance, but I'm not a big fan of that term because it feels just so governmental. I prefer the clients participating with me as a team, with the veterinarian, with the shelter or rescue. We're all working with as a team to help the dog through these issues. And so participation with the clients, of course, is important. Now, for the trainers listening in, one little side note here is to, not put more than your client is putting into, because it's the fastest road to compassion fatigue and burnout. So I like to use the 51-49 rule, where I'm giving 51% of my effort, as long as I'm getting 49% of the client's effort in return. So if I go there and I'm putting in all this work and it's like an 80-20 relationship, over the long run, that's going to burn you out. If you have 10 cases you're working on and it's like an 80-20, 90-10, you're doing all the work and they're doing very little each time, that is not good for you overall. So overall prognosis for you as a trainer can be poor in the long run if you continue to do that. So keep that in mind and communicate that to your clients, how much you expect in return and that you're going to be there for them as well. Okay, availability of helpers is, let's say the dog has issues with humans or dogs. Can we find those people? Now, during the pandemic, especially, not a lot of people are signing up to say, yeah, I'll be over during a pandemic to help you with your dog that might bite me, right? Not a lot of people are saying, yeah, I'll do that. So it's difficult to find the helpers sometimes. And if you don't have helpers, you don't change the behavior, right? There's no exposure to the actual stimulus. So if the issue is just strangers coming to the home, that can be a difficult thing to do. So sometimes, like if you have a client that has one visitor a year, sometimes it's just easier to say, okay, during that one day per year, let's just manage the dog, or put him in boarding, or have your friend watch him, or whatever is possible for that dog might be easier. Similarly with other dogs, not a lot of people are signing up their own dogs to work around dogs that have a history of aggression with dogs. So, but there are resources for these kind of things. Here in the States, we have something called Rover or WAG. They're pet sitting services, sort of like Uber for pet sitters, that you can hire those people. They're not watching the dog. They're just being decoys. So they're more than happy to come over the home most of the time and just be decoys, as long as everything's set up safely. They can be decoys, and they're happy to come over, get paid. They just show up, sit on the couch, or whatever we're doing for a behavior change strategy. You can use those people as well. Dogs, I like to use places where dogs will be safely contained at a distance. So dog parks where there's fenced in, and I'm working with my dog or the client's dog outside the dog park, of course, but they can see the dogs coming and going at a distance. Or pet stores or veterinary offices, as long as you're getting permission from those establishments to work with a dog. Again, at the other end of the parking lot, somewhere where it's safe, but you can get those gradual exposures if you have a dog with, let's say, leash issues towards other dogs. All right, and last but not least is this emotional bank account. This is a term I borrowed from Dr. Susan Friedman, who talks about how much is left in that person's tank to keep moving forward with their dog. Many cases in aggression, they are running on empty or running on fumes because of the bites that just happened, especially if it's owner directed. So if the dog has bitten the owner, a lot of times they are not feeling very good about their own dog. And that's normal. That's a very normal human response. Now, add in, let's say it's not the dog's first bite, maybe it's their fourth or fifth bite to the human. And maybe they've worked with another trainer and they've gone online and gotten advice and they've talked to experts and they're trying to do everything they can. We can reasonably assume again that they're going to be running on fumes. It's very difficult for that. It's very easy for other people to say, oh, there's stuff you can do, but we're never sitting in the same seat as that person. So it's important to be empathetic, very empathetic to people when they have an aggressive dog, because most of the time it's a very emotional situation and it's fraught with confusion. And they're not sure what to do. They're trying things aren't working. So it's a very stressful time for many of these pet owners and clients. And again, our job is to be empathetic to that, because empathy is going to allow you to move forward at a much faster pace often than if the client's feeling very not sure what to do and feeling that they can't trust anybody with the discussion. So I'm going to assess for that, and I will ask them at the end of the prognosis as I go through these things. I don't go through all 18 things with every client. I kind of determine what are the most important variables to talk to them about. So I'll go through that with them, and then they're going to have a much better understanding of how things might go in their case. They're going to understand why their dog is doing what they're doing, and they're going to understand how to manage it and options for behavior change strategies. That's when you're going to start to refill that emotional bank account. You're going to put a little bit more into that account of saying, okay, you can do this, you can move forward. Another good way to do that is to ask them to remember the things they like doing with their dog, the good moments, whether it's petting the dog on the couch instead of having to deal with the dog on leash outside barking and lunging and everything. So get them to remember those things, and that's going to add a little bit more currency into that emotional bank account that often can help you get that jump start you need to move forward in the case. And this is, as for the trainers and consultants in the group, it's really important this is a very emotional moment for many clients. When you finish off that prognosis and they now have a much bigger picture of their dog, but a better understanding of their dog, it can go in a couple of different ways. And so one of the questions I ask is, how are you feeling about all of this? So I go through the prognosis, I explain why their dog's doing what they're doing and all the variables that can make it more of a severe or less of a severe case. And I ask, how are you feeling? And it's your job at that moment to just sit back and listen to them, because they're going to reveal a lot of information to you about what their potential for participation is, how they're feeling about their dog, what they might be thinking in their decision-making process for the outcome for the dog. And you can get a variety of responses. Sometimes I get in there and let the client saying, oh, I feel so much better, Mike. I didn't realize, I thought it was a really severe issue, but you explained to me, it's that he's not biting hard. It's very predictable now. We can definitely manage this. And they feel much better. And on the other side of the coin, they might have not realized just how severe it is. They might think that you can change dogs' behavior like a light switch, so they have to kind of process that information. So you might consider saying, okay, well, why don't you think more on this and discuss it as a family, and then we can discuss potential follow-up sessions. So it's an important moment during the consultation to really determine what's going to be best in the long run for that client. So that's why I do the prognosis with everybody, because it's such a good communication tool as well. Okay, so let's get into a case study now. So I'm going to show you this case of Leo. I'm going to walk you through the steps. We're going to talk a little bit about the prognosis as well for Leo and how I discuss that with the client, and sort of the start to finish here of an aggression case, dog to human aggression case. So this is Leo here. He's a 2-year-old neutered Staffordshire mix. The client is Alexis. She lives alone, no kids, and she got this dog from a rescue at about 10 weeks of age. So he was like a little puppy when she got him. Here is his bite history. So these all happened before I started working with Alexis. She's first bite happened to, when he was younger. He bit a female adult's foot while she was out on a walk. So it did result in a puncture, slight scrape rather, but it resulted in quarantine. So here in the States, it's a 10-day quarantine for just to ensure the dog doesn't have rabies, but it is also a sort of mark on the dog's record that the dog has bitten. So, and a level 2, just to recap that, it's just on the Dunbar bite scale. Level 1 is just an air snap with no contact. Level 2 is teeth to skin contact with sometimes just some minor scrapes, but no deep puncture wounds. And then the second bite happened to an adult delivery driver coming to the home with some flowers. Yeah, he kind of standing in the doorway. Leo comes to the front door and bites him on the leg. Another level 2, so low level injury. The third one was a male at the liquor store. So she was in the store with Leo, and the man went to approach to go pet Leo, and he got bitten on the leg as well. Fourth one was to Alexis's friend. She's coming to the home. She goes, and now at this point, Alexis is worried about Leo biting people. So she's restraining him by the collar, which is generally not a good idea for dogs that have a history of aggression when they're around something that they might bite. But she goes to reach to try to pet him, and she got bitten on the finger, level 2. And the fifth one was the most severe one, which is level 3 bite to a child's leg. It was in Alexis's home, and it also resulted in a quarantine. It also resulted in a $300,000 lawsuit from the child's mother, who is Alexis's boyfriend's ex-wife. So the goal for Alexis was to move in with her boyfriend and have the children there sometimes. So the shared custody thing with the ex-wife. But so she went to go to try to introduce the child to Leo. He was in his crate and he seemed okay to Alexis, so she let him out of his crate. He circled around and bit the child on the leg. So level 3, which is slight puncture wounds, or not very deep puncture wounds, but there's still puncture wounds involved. So that's what happened there. So 5 bites in his history, 2 on record. So we've got some variables, as you can see there, that we're going to talk about in the overall prognosis. Some additional information about him. He bites garbage can wheels. So he's got this real ingrained behavior of biting garbage can wheels. And it's a function of his stress displacement. So when he gets stressed, he'll start redirecting his bite either on the leash or on the garbage can wheels or on cars. I one time went to the client's home. I had a rental car because my car was in the shop. And we're just standing there talking, and he sees like a child in the distance, and he gets frustrated, and he turns and bites the bumper, puts a nice size hole in the bumper of my rental car. Fortunately, they didn't notice anything, but that's what happened there. So he does redirect on things. Fortunately, he doesn't redirect on people. So redirect means the dog bites whatever's closest to them. He's never bitten Alexis. He's never bitten me or anybody else working with him. He will bite things that are close by, though. And garbage can wheels, unfortunately, are one of the victims of his redirected aggression. He doesn't display any overt warning signals to threats. So he doesn't bark, he doesn't growl. He goes almost right to biting. And one of the reasons why is that he worked with a previous trainer. So the previous trainer, she hired him because he used to bark and growl and make a lot more noise towards things in the environment, like kids and some strangers. So she hired a trainer before me using a prong collar, and it worked on paper, meaning it looked good because they were able to suppress the barking. So he stopped barking and growling, but he still continued to bite. So they were good at, they basically uh, uh, punished out those signals of barking and growling, and he's now learned to go straight to biting because the underlying reason for his behavior was never addressed. Only the outside behavior, so to speak, was suppressed through that type of training. Um, he was also healthy, very healthy client, very healthy dog, very committed client. Also, you're going to see that Alexis participates really well. She's got decent training skills once she gets going, and so very, very committed. In fact, when I went there, she said to me on the first day, you're stuck with me, right? I said, what do you mean? And she's like, you're not going anywhere. And I was like, all right, where is this going? And she meant that she's committed. And I still talk to Alexis this day. This case is about three years now. I've been working with her, but I don't need to continue working with her. She knows what to do, but she still likes to have that. I guess, security blanket of knowing that she can get in touch with me. So she texts me sometimes still to this day about how she's doing. So, but she said, I don't need to move in with my boyfriend because that's one of her goals was to move in with the boyfriend. Because she's like, I don't need to move in with my boyfriend. He can go. I'm just going to keep Leo. And she was completely serious about it. So very committed. He's also got no issues with other dogs, which is great. He goes to dog daycare a couple times a week. So he's great with other dogs. His issues are with people. Okay, so I'm going to play this video for you. Hopefully it's not too choppy, but I will slow it down once I go back to it. But I want you to just watch this and think about what you would do here. So this is my first time coming onto the property. He's got what's called a back tie on, which is a long leash attached to something sturdy, which is this tree here. That's going to allow me to get the most observation when I'm first working with a dog. Like you saw yesterday with the German Shepherd, sometimes I just want to meet the dog safely. So some layers of protected contact, but it's going to allow me to see how fast I can establish a relationship if I am able to at first. But watch this video and think, like, is this a dog, if you didn't know anything about the bite history, is this a dog you would go up and say hello to and pet, or maybe let them sniff you, or, would you interact with this dog closely based on this video? So I've got the back tie. I'm also wearing some protective gear just for my own safety, but you'll see like his general behavior here on the long line.
You can just hang back. I'll work with him. Here you go. Have a cookie. Good.
So I ask this question I show this case in a lot of different places, and I ask the question, would you approach this dog? And this is a lot of times to animal trainers and professionals and people that have been around dogs a lot. And about half will say, yeah, I would say hello. He looks pretty good. He's not barking, he's not growling, he's showing some soft behaviors. And about the other half will say, well, he's throwing some stress signals here and there, and I would be cautious. But I think there's a little bias because of the bite history. Yeah, but if we didn't know that, we would be saying, "Oh, I'm not sure," because Let me see if I can freeze frame it here. Where is it? So right there, some people note that, oh, he's doing a play bow. And he looks like he wants to kind of say hello, and he's wagging his tail, and so that's the observations there. The difference between what he's doing here and a play bow is this is called a prey bow, so Prey, and it's often used for dogs to actually launch with much more speed and efficiency towards their target. So you don't see it quite as often as with dogs off leash. You'll see it prevalently more with dogs on leash, but it's something to watch for because this can get you in trouble, especially if the dog's been punished for barking and growling, because you can't hear that now. So less signals to see. But the way to tell the difference really is watch what the dog is targeting. So if you have treats, great. So they might start looking at your treat hand. Or if the dog is more friendly, they might be looking at your face. So there's a classic stress signal there, a little tongue flick. But what he starts doing is he's targeting my legs and feet. And if you go back to his bite history, all of the people that have been bitten are from the waist down, two to the legs, one to the foot, or actually 3 to the legs, 1 to the foot, and 1 to the hand, reaching down below waist level. So he is targeting me. He's keeping a good eye on my feet and my legs as far as what to bite first to make this guy go away. And the deceiving thing is he is taking treats, but he's still not okay with me. So that's a little observation video for today. So let's go into the prognosis for Leo. So some of the positive indicators of good things in his case is that this client is super committed. I mean, probably one of the most committed clients I've ever had. And so that's very, very good for prognosis in most of your cases. If you have a client that is committed at this level and has the resources to do it, you can have a much more difficult dog in terms of behavior change, bite history, and all of those things if you have the committed client. I have another client, for instance, in Norway, and this dog has got issues with resources and the other dogs in the home and strangers and handling issues and husbandry issues, and has bitten the client several times. And the dog is doing wonderfully because of such a committed client. That dog would not wouldn't last long in many other homes because you wouldn't have that level of commitment. So client commitment is very, very crucial for success in aggression cases. You also note the bite inhibition. So he's not biting at a high level, at least to adults. So that's good in terms of risk assessment. He's not, if he was biting at a higher level, let's say levels 4 or 5, that's a much more risky and dangerous case. Healthy, he's good health, so we don't have to worry about addressing any health issues that could be contributing to the behavior. It's very manageable for the client. She lives alone. She's able to close doors and make sure he's muzzled out in public and all those things without much issues. So very manageable. You'll see the client has good training skills as she goes along. She's got plenty of helpers, so people to help her come over to the home. Work with Leo. She works out at a CrossFit gym, and she's very social, so she's got lots of people that are willing to help her. And her emotional bank account was spilling over. You're going to hear her in the videos constantly complimenting her dog because she loves him so much, and so there's nothing in her mind saying I need to change what I'm doing here in terms of with Leo. Very, very committed. Some of the negative indicators, though, we talked about the legal history. So he's got multiple incidents, 2 on record. We can reasonably assume the third one is going to result in much more severe consequences from the animal control officers in her town. We do have a bite to the child that adds more layers of risk, especially if she's considering moving in with a boyfriend. But again, she said, I don't need to. The range of antecedents. So the number of triggers that he has is wide. It's basically any human in proximity to him when he's not ready for it. So men, women, and children, and of course the other targets in environment, garbage can wheels, car bumpers, and other things. But we have to monitor that stress level. That's a big component for this case. The predictability is now poor. It's not mostly for other people in the environment. So he's a dog that's very easy to say, oh, I love dogs and he's cute and let me come say hello. All dogs love me. kind of thing. Let me do the magical hand and he'll sniff it, which is, again, a bad idea for a dog like Leo. And so the predictability is not there because he's not barking and growling and doing things that most people would say, oh, maybe I should back off. He's just being very efficient about now his biting now. And he's got that negative previous training experience. So we've suppressed some of those signals, which we'd love to get back. We love dogs who actually bark and growl because that gives us plenty of warning that a bite could happen. But unfortunately, that was suppressed. So we would try to undo some of that. So here's the client goals. She wanted no more reactivity on walks, which meant no more lunging, no more pulling on leash towards children or other people, no more bites to visitors. It's a very reasonable goal. And eventual integration with boyfriend and children. That was the one I talked to her about. I said, this is probably one you have to really think about. And it might not be a possibility if we don't see a significant amount of behavior change with people. And the other issue with children is not a lot of people are signing up their kids to go work with aggressive dogs, right? So it's very difficult to find helpers. Okay, so the recommendations here. This is a list of 7 bullet points, but there's actually only 4 recommendations here. You do not want to give a really lofty list of recommendations to clients because you're often going to see a lack of participation. Just like anything else we do in life, if your doctor says, you need to eat a good diet, you need to exercise, you need to wake up at this time, you need to take this shower, and all these things you start to add up, you're less likely to follow through on all of those things. So make sure your behavior plans are very simple. And this behavior change strategy is actually only one thing. And you'll see that in a moment because the rest are just management and handling skills. So we incorporated the Baskerville muzzle for safety. So adding in that for when she was doing training sessions, of course, around strangers. We want to monitor his stress and frustration levels because, as I said yesterday, these fuels, if we're dealing with a highly fueled dog that's stressed and frustrated, we're not going to make a lot of impact or we're risking a potentially explosive situation because the dog is fueled up. So great thing about Leo is that when he gets stressed or frustrated, he starts to bite the leash or the garbage can wheels or things like that. So it's easy to tell when he's stressed, but we don't want him stressed. So we're going to keep him out of situations where he does get stressed. Leash handling skills, you'll see that the leash is a little bit of an issue for Leo. Leash is going to be an issue for many dogs because it restricts the flight option, restricts their opportunity to move away from something if they don't want to be near it. But it also can drive frustration into the behavior as well. The last 4 here is that differential reinforcement strategy we covered yesterday. We're going to teach Leo what we want him to do instead when he sees strangers, right? And then we're going to gradually decrease distance over sessions, and then we start to hopefully get interactions with strangers and then more normal interactions with strangers. And you'll see that progression through the videos here. So here's the first video, behavior change strategy with Alexis. First time working outside with her, with Leo, and we're working at a distance. There's a guy with just working in his van here. So he's one decoy we're using, and then there's children walking on the street behind me. So there's kind of a busy road where she lives, and there's lots of kids walking up and down the street. So she's working with Leo at a distance. You'll see a little bit of frustration at first from him, but he quickly downshifts to where he's working with Alexis. She's marking and reinforcing him for noticing either the guy in the van or the children behind me.
So this gives you a little indication that when he gets too close, right? But give him a second to reset and pull him back a little bit so the leash is loose. Try to get the leash loose, just pull him back again a little bit so he's next to you, and then relax. So it'll get the leash relaxed. Relax. So go start with it again. Good. 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 Perfect. There you go. Now you got it. That guy too? Good. Perfect. Good. Perfect. There you go. You're getting it down really quick.
Not rocket science,
So you only give it to him when he looks.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, good.
Good. So
nice job by Alexis, first time doing that technique. And so you can see just where Leo's starting out. So we're at a distance, we're setting the stage as best we can for success. This is her home, by the way, so we're working kind of just in front of her house. So I gave her that homework. I said, you're going to go and work with this as best you can in front of your house, or any places you can go where you can get out of the car and work at a distance from people. So I came back a second session. You're going to see some nice changes in his body language here, but I want you to, again, ask yourself the question, is this a dog you would approach?
That's a good sign when he does that whole like high-fiving thing. You've taught him that though, right? Like the high five.
Guy's a goddamn genius. He's not really. Have you been watching him since the first time?
He's way better, yeah. Yeah. He was super hesitant to do any of that stuff. Remember when he was sitting the
He did
first
it,
time? He
the
was like
first time
really
for a
like
minute,
cautiously.
And now he's not barely even paying attention to you.
You know. But the one thing he's still not doing is voluntarily approaching. So.
And so you can see his signals are much less stressed in this video, but he's still not approaching me. So even though I have food, he's still keeping his distance. So, you know, my assessment for his underlying motivation was fear-based, but you can see where he is less stressed here, but he still does not approach me from his distance when he could. So, okay. Next up, this is just a little bit an additional video on, we worked on wheel biting behavior. Now, one of the things about Alexis's training with him was that she kind of did the old-fashioned way of teaching leave it. So she would say leave it and then correct him if he didn't leave the garbage can wheel alone. So again, having to shift some clients' mindsets, we have to teach them about what we want the dog to do instead. And why don't we just reinforce Leo for voluntarily leaving the wheels alone? And so we start to work on that here. So you can see her muscle memory kicks in and she's starting to say, leave it, leave it. And I said, let's try it without the leave it. Let's see if he can do this on his own. We'll reinforce him if he leaves the garbage can wheels alone.
Leave it? Good. He's a little. Leave it? Good.
Try not to say leave it this time. So let's see if he'll do it on his own. Just walk him around again. Yes, see?
Good.
Perfect.
Good. Good.
So sometimes we just gotta let the dogs teach the owners a little bit of what to do here. Okay, so second session now. So I'm now working in the home. So you can see, for me, I started at outside. It's almost always easier for dogs that have issues with people in general to start outside where there's more distance, more freedom of movement. Then we move inside the home, but you can still, I'm giving plenty of distance here. I'm basically standing as far away from where she's going to be coming down, and she's going to be repeating the same process. So food happens as soon as he notices me in his home, which is a pretty big deal for him because he hasn't seen anybody in his house in a long time. So we're teaching him that if you see this guy in the home, it predicts food is for you as well. You'll see her timing is a little bit off with when she marks him. Sometimes she marks him for looking at her, which isn't the end of the world. It's still a desirable behavior. It's not biting, so we'll take it. But you'll see that she marks him. What she's supposed to be doing is marking him for noticing me in the home.
He looked right back at you. It's great.
No?
There you go. Yeah, he looked right back at you.
Good. Good.
So let him look back this way. There we go. Hey.
Look. Good. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. Good.
Good.
All right, so bring him on. He looks great.
Oh, good. Were you expecting that reaction?
No, that was really good.
I'm telling you.
That was awesome.
I could be a freaking dog trainer.
Okay, and now towards the end of the session, so this is going back to that warm-up factor I was talking about earlier. He's actually got a pretty decent warm-up factor. So first session, I didn't make any close contact with him. This is the end of the second session. He's, again, giving me good body language throughout the session. You can see the initial part of the video. He's very quick to respond to Alexis, less stressed behavior. So this is where I start working with him more closely. Safely, of course, he's got the muzzle on. So I'll let you watch this.
Good boy. So these offering behaviors. Good.
I know you did such a good job with that.
Good boy. Well, Leo, and you can move with him if he gets up. Leo, come on. Leo, Leo, come on. Thank you, good boy.
So that time he approaches, and that's a good, again, you're looking at behavior as a good barometer of how the dog is feeling about you. And you can see there's very, very little stress signals going on there. I'm using spray cheese in a can, just so you know. I don't know if they sell that there where you are, but they sell, it's a thing here, cheese in a can, which actually it comes out like a little like pastry tube kind of flow to the cheese. But Leo loves the spray cheese, and so does the owner. She reinforces herself during our training sessions as well. But very useful to feed through muzzles as well. And but you can make that on your own. You can get like a food tube, the old style camping food tubes that look like toothpaste tubes, and you fill that with soft food like canned dog food or something really high value, and you can squeeze that as well. If you're using something like that, you can use that for dogs with muzzles, or if you're doing any kind of duration feeding or distraction type of work, you can use food tubes. Very helpful. Okay, next up, so after he's gotten good with me, a lot of questions I get, like, how do you start to generalize this to other people? Well, you got to have people come over. And so I brought a couple of the trainers with me through the session. So this is Angela here. You'll see her in the video standing near her car. But notice we start outside the home again to make it easy for Leo. So I wouldn't necessarily bring Angela into the home on our first session for just the second person Leo's meeting. We'll do that in future sessions, but this one, we're starting outside.
Another pass by, but go that way, but with the same distance now. So wait for him to nose. Good. Perfect. Now what you're going to do is just give him a little more eye contact with a little more frontal like posturing, nothing too overt, but so he can actually start seeing you looking at him. So do another pass by that way, but she's going to be looking at him this time, which can make a difference.
So she's, again, notice the distance. That one played a little bit choppy, but there's enough distance between her and Angela that Leo's not going to react. They're outside the home. Same concept, though. She's just marking and reinforcing him for noticing Angela. She's standing, if you can see her there to the left of that car. And Angela's doing a good job of not doing anything intense. So I talked about intensity yesterday. She's not like making direct eye contact with him yet. She's not trying to reach for him. She's not moving a lot. So again, it makes it easier for Leo. You add in those things later on because people are going to do what people do. So we want to add in those kind of things, but you layer those in so that you can keep the dog successful in the process. This, you'll see that she gets a little too close. You can actually see this line sort of in the street that she crosses. And again, I think it's a little too close. So you see Leo leaning into his leash a little bit, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So we want to make those adjustments so we don't see that kind of potential for lunging there.
And then he's probably going to look at her, and that's when you're going to mark and feed that if he looks. Right there. Good. And then walk him away. Good.
Good.
Great.
So I'll freeze frame that where he is a little too close so you can see that. So you can see there's tension in the leash. His ears are forward, he's leaning in that direction. So that's something we want to avoid when we're working with these kind of scenarios. It should always be a nice relaxed leash as much as possible, provided the dog's got some loose leash walking skills. But we don't want to see this kind of tension. But so we just make adjustments. We'll say on the next pass, you're going to go a little bit further away to keep ensure Leo's successful. So once you start with a stationary, so you can see Angela's car here, she was just standing there, which makes it easy. But now we want to actually do some parallel walking. So you can do that where you're just walking next to each other, but at a distance. Same thing, mark and reinforce for noticing the stranger.
Good.
Good.
So whenever you're starting with somebody new, high rate of reinforcement.
Good.
So like, yeah. So it's just like before when we were doing it like crazy amounts for something new, that you go right back to that same routine with somebody new. That way, yeah, you know, just like any other behavior. Yeah, perfect. Good.
Good.
Dude, can't have it. I'm working with you.
Good.
All right. And this is later on in the session. Now we're working towards getting Angela in the home, but she's just showing up at the front door, and Leo's further away in the living room. So let me show you that. Let me just freeze frame that here.
Open so it doesn't shut all the way behind you.
So you can see where she's standing here. So a little bit of distance there. We're about 10 feet or a few meters from the front door. And Angela's just showing up at the front door. So you can't see Angela showing up, but she's behind me, behind the camera. And again, you can see where we're marking and reinforcing Leo for noticing that.
Good.
Yeah, that's awesome. You can stay. Yep, she went away. Okay.
He didn't
So
even-
I'm
he didn't
going
even
to repeat
budge.
that. So we're going to do it again.
Good. Oh, sorry, dude.
Excellent.
My finger to the next tree.
So let's let him see that she's not here. Okay, now we're going to do it again.
Good.
So a couple of key points to just recap there is that the food or the cheese or whatever it is you're using has to happen after the stranger appears. If you do it the other way around, where you're distracting the dog with cheese before the stranger shows up and then the dog notices it, you run the risk of making things a lot worse, because cheese could start predicting strangers showing up and the dog becomes more apprehensive or on guard about it. So always food happens after. You'll notice the leash is on, but that's just for safety, to prevent Leo from going towards the front door. And you'll notice he's sitting, but we don't ask the dogs to sit in fear-based cases, because we don't want them to feel restricted. He chose to sit on his own. It's totally fine if the dog wants to sit or lay down, no problem, because they're choosing to do that. That's an indication actually that they might be more comfortable with the situation, but we never actually ask for that or cue that to expect it to happen, because we want them to feel like, all right, if I want to move away from the front door, it's a better choice than to charge the front door and bite that person. So make sure they have freedom of movement.
You just come in.
And the next one here, this is a little bit more on the assessment of prognosis. You'll see Leo, this is a cold trial. Cold trials where you just come onto the property or expose the dog to the stimulus without any kind of warm-up period. So this is me arriving.
Okay. Hi, buddy.
Good boy.
Good. You want to do some cheese first?
See, he loves you.
So that's good. He sees you. Good.
Good.
Nope, that was a big glove. I gotta get used to the pressure on this thing. Let's see if he'll do a little.
So you can see he's the warm-up factor is there. So in other words, when I'm establishing a relationship with a dog over a few sessions, I like to see it continue to blossom, and the dog being much more affiliative and friendly with me, versus dogs that they're after 3 or 4 sessions, they're not interested in you at all. Or sometimes it's like 50 first dates, the dog forgets who you are and you have to constantly remind them, it's me again, I'm the guy with the cheese, and it takes them a little time to warm up. Those are sometimes a little bit more difficult cases. So fortunately, we're seeing a nice warm-up factor with Leo here. So next I brought my son here. So I was able to use my son as a decoy for Leo, again, done safely, but also you gotta pay your kids with like Dave and Buster's or whatever you can do to make sure that they continue to come along with you. But you'll see the same concept. Now we did some initial introductions outside, but we moved inside the home. And I'm having my son just stand up and sit down here as visual stimuli that could potentially trigger a dog like Leo. And same process, we're just marking and reinforcing Leo for noticing that. You'll see Leo actually start looking back towards Alexis without any prompting or marking of that behavior. because Leo is learning that when my son stands up, it predicts cheese is happening. So my son's now the environmental cue to look back at Alexis for the cheese.
See if you can do it with him noticing. Try it again. And sit down. Good. There you go. And again. Good. So give him a second to finish that cheese. There we go. Again. Good. That was faster that time. Good.
So you can see that she doesn't even have to do much. Like, he's offering sits, he's looking back at her when my son gets up and down. So he's really grasping this concept. And that's what we really want to see, is that the dog's throwing those behaviors at the owner. Like, look what I can do. I know what to do here. You know, if I sit or if I just look at him and look back, I'm going to get paid off. So that's where you know you're really starting to see good behavior change taking hold. I see it's about at the top of the hour now. I've got about maybe 5 more minutes of slides, and then we'll jump into Q&A in about 5 more minutes. So we're going to finish up this case. Let's see. So we also did some close quarter interactions with my son. Here's a little safety tip for any of you trainers working with these kind of cases. You can do 2 layers of safety if the kids are doing any kind of close feeding. That's if you get to that step. There's a lot of things you want to watch for when you're doing any kind of hand feeding or close quarter interaction with children or with people in general with dogs. You want to make sure that dog is absolutely okay with that interaction, and it's not just the food that they're okay with, because you don't want to put them into a state of conflict where they're like, oh, I love cheese, but I don't like kids, so I don't know what to do here. And that can create a lot of issues if you do that to dogs. So be really careful and assess that the dog is actually like, I like this kid and I like his cheese. But to be safe with kids, you could do this like fence setup with the muzzle on, so that little fingers, kids' fingers don't get inside the muzzle. All right, so now we're working with another stranger. So I brought another trainer to the home. This time we're starting in the home. So you can see the progression where I had to start outside the home. I'm the first person Leo's seen in a while and been interacting with him. Then I brought the other trainer, but we still didn't necessarily have any direct interaction. So now the third trainer, though, since we're seeing progress, you start to add in those layers of difficulty. So let's start inside the house. Let's get a little closer. Let's do some normal interactions. So this is all in one over the course of a session here. So this is Beth just sitting at the table, so not making it too hard, because if Beth was running around the home, that's a lot harder. But if she's sitting, it's not as difficult for Leo. But we're inside the home to start.
Hey, Leo. Hey.
There, perfect.
That's good.
Yeah. Good. So you need a little time to figure out that particular circumstance. Like this also happens here. So you know, so you do want to switch up the routines, the scenarios,
Okay.
people getting up different areas of the house and stuff. What do you think, Leo?
Good.
And if you notice again, he's looking back at Alexis without any kind of prompting or cueing, because he's starting to really understand this routine. Person in the home means I need to just check in with mom, and because they predict cheese is going to happen as well. So very fast progression with this, with Beth, where she was able to get much closer, much faster than the previous couple of people we involved. And you'll see she's also doing some movement, standing up, sitting down, which can be triggers for some dogs.
So let's make it easy for him. You're gonna slowly stand, but you're gonna motion with the cheese at the same time. So like the cheese and you are gonna move at the same time. There you go. Perfect. Nice. Good. And you can sit again. Try that. Very nice. Good. Give him a second to eat that. Awesome. Let's wait one more second here.
And if you notice, we're also generalizing this to different locations, different contexts. So first she was in the dining room, now she's in the living room. Now she's near the front door, so we'll see this video. So you start to mix and match the areas, so it starts to really generalize to this person and people in general.
Good boy.
Good boy.
Who is it? Good. You can reward that. That's good. Good.
Do you want to give her a smell?
All right, so let's do the cheese. Let's do. Do you feel comfortable feeding?
Yeah.
So right underneath, you know where to feed him.
Yeah. Good boy.
Good boy,
Good.
Leo. Whoa,
Oh.
And I squirted 2 boxes.
not a professional.
Right, and now moving into the kitchen area. So we basically covered all the areas on the first floor: dining room, living room, front door, and now the kitchen here.
Location can be a different situation for all dogs, so you want to look at him really well when you do this. So you can ask him to sit.
Hi. Sit.
Cool.
Yes.
Excellent.
He even
See?
still looks back at me when he looks at her.
Yeah.
I love how he checks in with you. That's awesome.
He's freaking awesome because I don't have no idiot for a dog. Just someone who doesn't like a lot of people, which is similar to me.
Well, you good boy, huh?
Very good, yes.
What a good boy. Good, you can feed that. Totally
Oh,
feed that. Yeah.
good boy, Leo.
So behavior also tells you a lot about how the dog is feeling. So he voluntarily approaches, he offers the sit to Beth. So it gives you a good indication of his comfort level there. Now this is the end of the session with Beth, and you can see where it happens, where he shifts to this. So it's all over the course of one session.
Even when he's frustrated.
Yes. Good job, honey.
Good night.
Is that a lot?
It's great.
So you can see how we progress with these things. So if I was to bring in another person, which Alexis does on her own, but if I was to bring in another person, we'd be able to make even faster progress, most likely, with that person, because Leo's starting to understand how to meet people. So this is Alexis's neighbor. Leo tried to bite this guy previously, so she did a little work with him. So this is about 3 months into when I started with Alexis. So about 3 months after I started with Alexis. She's off working on her own a little bit now with people because she understands the process. And she did a couple of sessions with this guy, who's the neighbor. I don't know if it's the new boyfriend or what's happening there, but he's over there, and she's sending me these great pictures of these nice interactions of him establishing those relationships. And this is at a 4-month update. So he had been over a couple of times to meet Leo, and you can see, he's fitting in that nice category of a great warm-up factor where he is, once he gets to know you, you're in. So if you're in his inner circle, you're in. So this video shows that.
Did I see this? Oh. I'm having some now. I'm having some. Oh, we got the fuzzy in your mouth. Huh.
And she's now able to have brand new strangers come over. She actually texted me just before the holidays last year, and she had 6 of her friends over to the house for the first time. They all met Leo, muzzled first just for safety purposes, but then by the end of the party, totally fine with everybody in the house. So he's been really great and made great progress since I started working with her. And again, due to her excellent commitment, she's very really great client. So. Okay, there's my contact info again. Feel free to reach out to me on those channels, and let's jump into some Q&A now.
Thank you, Mike, for your sharing today. It was wonderful to hear more about how we can successfully modify aggressive behavior in dogs using science-based methods. Now we will proceed to the Q&A session. Thank you to everyone who has sent in your questions. Due to the shortage of time, we might not be able to get to every question, and we apologize in advance. Let's start with the first question. Is it possible to work on a dog's reactivity or aggression while it is in the shelter? What would be the most efficient way to go about doing it?
Yeah, I think it depends, again, on how much staff and resources that shelter has, and also the environment. If there's a behavior team and ample time, you're going to be able to get a lot more work done with that dog. But if it's a limited staff with limited time and a difficult shelter environment, meaning it's difficult to, like, say, walk the dog past a certain kennel row and the dog's barking at all the other dogs, or certain areas, it's in a very, like a city environment, so that's going to be more difficult. So I'll weigh those variables as well, but it is absolutely possible to make improvement regardless of it's the best shelter in the world or one that has, just starting out with very few finances. You can always do something to improve that dog's quality of life while also working on the behavior change. For shelters, I really try to help them with the management aspect and the environment aspect. If you can do things like install visual blockers so that the dog can't see, for instance, other dogs going by, or from their own kennel, or vice versa, seeing dogs as they walk by the kennel row. Can you change up the traffic pattern? Can you do things to help change the environment? I'll give you a good example. Out in the UK, there's a place called Dogs Trust that I visited, and I visited a lot of shelters, mainly because my colleague Trish McMillan is well-known shelter expert, so I always tag along with her. And their shelter system and out in the UK, the Dogs Trust, they have thought of everything for inside of a shelter. And one of the really cool things I saw is that they have a kennel row, and of course most shelters do. All the dogs are kind of in kennels. And what happens is dogs see another dog going by and they all start barking, and then the dog that's being walked by starts barking at the dogs in the kennel. So what they did was just install a couple those long boards you might see in like a dog reactivity class, where it just blocks the visual, and they just turned them at a 45-degree angle. So it's very easy to still get the dogs in and out of the kennel, but now they can't see each other going by on the kennel row, and it completely reduces the amount of barking that can happen in reactivity. So little things like that can make a big difference. So to answer the question, yes, things can be done, but dependent on how much resources available.
Hi, okay, next question. When a dog owner faces challenges associated with his or her dog aggressive behavior, at what point should the owner look for professional help?
Yesterday. So whenever there's a case of aggression or you're seeing aggression, it's better to get help sooner than later, because oftentimes it doesn't get better on its own unless it's just like somebody figures out a good management scenario. Typically it can start to escalate because the rehearsal of the behavior is going to happen. So what I mean by that is the dog's going to practice the behavior. And the thing with aggression or aggressive behavior is that it is highly, highly reinforcing for that animal because it makes something scary go away or a threat go away typically. So if you're experiencing anything where the dog is growling, lunging, barking, anything that has you concerned, it is best to seek out a professional sooner than later, because a lot of the cases, unfortunately, people don't seek out professionals until the dog has bitten somebody. That's when it's an emergency or it becomes a problem. And a lot of people will say, like, okay, if the dog's just growling, maybe I don't have to worry about it. So it's sort of like your car, your check engine light comes on, you're like, well, I'll wait a little bit. And then if you wait too long and suddenly your engine's seized up, that's when it's a problem. So try to tackle it before it becomes that problem is always my advice.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, the next question is, in your opinion, what are the 3 major things to avoid doing with or to a growling puppy that may encourage aggression later on in life?
Great question. Great question. So number 1, of course, is avoiding any kind of harsh punishment or aversive stimulus for that puppy, because most puppies, they're doing it out of a place of, again, it's fear, or they're under socialized around a particular stimulus or something. They're basically saying, I'm a little bit worried about whatever it is that I'm growling or barking at. And we don't want to create more negative associations by saying, okay, I'm going to, scold you right after you growled, because it doesn't help them feel better about that particular situation, which is what we're trying to do when we modify most aggressive behavior. So definitely avoid punishment. Learn how to read the dogs really well. So understanding dog body language is probably the second most important thing you can do for all dogs, but puppies especially, because they're going to communicate very clearly when they're uncomfortable with something. If we can start to see that at the subtle signs of it, like Leo, we're going to be able to avoid making the dog have to go to those more overt signals of growling and biting and those things. So if we can work with the dogs at a much lower level of stress or frustration, whatever fear that they're experiencing, and we recognize that, then we're going to be able to help them much more. Third thing is just to, look at your own relationship with the dog and the puppy in regards to, you know, just understanding them, but also making sure you're meeting that particular puppy's needs as far as their breed, their temperament. So every dog is going to be a unique individual. And a big part of that is, as their caretakers and owners, is really focusing on that relationship aspect by understanding what their needs are from a behavioral standpoint, especially. So a good example is like if I adopt a 12-week-old Belgian Malinois, I've got to understand what I'm getting into versus if I adopted a 12-week-old Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Two completely different dogs, likely with completely different behaviors and different needs. And so to make sure we're understanding what dogs have been developed for, what certain breeds have been developed for, can go a long way to helping puppies. So really excellent question. So
Okay, the next one is a scenario. What is your opinion about a family of 6? One of them, who is the elder brother, continues to taunt the dog to make it react aggressively. He refuses to listen even after the initial consultation. The dog has bitten 2 family members previously. The father has stopped taunting the dog, but the elder brother refuses to listen to the advice. How would you manage such a situation? Would you suggest having the dog rehomed?
that's a good question. I think it's going to depend on how much I think I can influence the behavior of that person. And we can only do so much because, we're not human psychologists. We're there for helping the dog. So what I will do is, often it depends on the age of that person too. So if it's depending on the age of the child, especially if it's a child involved, I'm going to take a different line of communication depending on how I can affect that. But one of the things to do is ask them, what do you think is going to happen, or what do you think could potentially happen, or what are the outcomes that could happen if this continues in this direction? So if you start, and I wouldn't call it I wouldn't say don't tease her, but I would be a little bit direct. I'd say, what do you think is going to be the outcome if you continue with this interactions with your dog? So without labeling it, without teasing your dog, I say, well, the current interactions you're having with your dog, get them thinking about it a little bit, because that will sometimes help shift it. If they say, well, I don't know, and then you can say, do you think there's potential for a bite, and maybe a bite to one of your other family members because of the interactions and this behavior, inadvertent behavior reinforcement that's going on. So you can pick your language carefully, so it's not directly criticizing them, but it also brings out hopefully some of their thought process, because you can say all day long, don't do this, don't do that. But if they don't get that into their mind of why their behavior could impact things negatively, then it's usually not going to shift things too much. So you do sometimes have to say, okay, it's not very fair for this dog to be here with this human. So we look at rehoming options for some cases. So I think it's case by case basis, depending on how much you think you can change the human's behavior. And then you might have to discuss rehoming options for some cases as well.
Yep, thanks, Mike. The next question is, under what circumstances would you recommend using behavior medication for aggression cases?
Good question. So there's actually a really great article from Suzanne Clothier that's out there. It's called The 3 Ps. She looks at propensity, provocation, and persistence, I think, for the 3 Ps. But it's a great way of looking at the severity of the behavior. And so let's say you have a dog that growls near the food bowl, normal level of behavior. But if you have a dog that somebody walks into the home from another room, the dog leaves the food bowl, charges across the house, and mauls that person, that's a high level of intensity. So the provocation isn't much. And you're going to look at how persistent it is to behavior change strategies in terms of not being affected. So if I'm working with a dog for many, many sessions and we're seeing very little change based on all the strategies I'm using, we might employ behavior medication there. For dogs that are globally fearful or anxious, or have some very clear underlying global anxiety to stimuli in the environment, that's another great case. So if the dog's everything like the sky is falling all the time, perfect case for medication. And also situationally, I might talk to veterinarians about behavior meds for when a dog, let's say we're going to we're in a city environment and we're going to go work at the park, and that's where the dog has the most issues. But that's the only place we have as options for that client, and it's still going to be somewhat stressful for the dog. So we're going to look at situational meds. Let's say, let's give you something that's going to help you cope for that one training session, or that for those particular environments in which you have issues with. So like for a veterinary visit or something like that. So, and of course, dogs that have a real high level of aggression, we're going to be talking about behavior meds. So quite a few different scenarios, case by case. I do want to preface this by saying, I'm not a veterinarian, so and if you're not a veterinarian, you have to be careful. You don't want to say like, oh, go put your dog on Prozac, or you're really making any kind of medical recommendations or diagnosis, because unless you're a vet, you can't do that. But it's important to work with vets that have an understanding of that. So to work as a team in conjunction with the vets, and you can absolutely say, I think you should talk to Dr. So-and-so about potential behavior medication for your dog. That's absolutely okay for you to do as a trainer or consultant. You just be careful not to say something like, your dog needs Xanax, because that can get you in trouble.
Okay, the next question is, some trainers recommend using correction tools like a prong collar or shock collar as a last resort for dog aggression, as otherwise the dog would be euthanized for dangerous behavior. What are your comments on that?
Good question. And to give you a little bit about my background, I started about 17 years ago now as using those tools. So my first mentor was a military dog trainer, and the first few days, all we did was attach a leash to a fence just so I could get used to or practice the technique of leash correction. So it gives you a little idea of my background. I've used almost every tool that's out there. So I have a background in choke chains and prong collars and e-collars until I transitioned to what I'm doing now. I can speak from understanding those tools, and it's an interesting question because that's sort of as you make that shift, and as a crossover trainer, that just simply means, or is loosely defined as somebody that's moved from using those types of tools to positive reinforcement-based methods. You still get stuck in that conundrum sometimes where, okay, this last resort is the e-collar or the prong collar. And I've had that mindset too in the past. I said, okay, we've tried these positive reinforcement things, and we've got to resort to the prong collar now. But as I've gone and learned more, I've continued to shift my mindset, and I wouldn't actually consider those last resort tools. I'm looking at changing what I'm doing from a positive reinforcement paradigm as the last resort, because that means I'm doing something wrong with my behavior change strategies. And as you get better at any skill, whether it's traditional training or positive reinforcement training, you're going to start to see the subtleties in what you need to change, but you're still staying with the same methodology. So a good example is, let's say you have a dog that is barking and lunging at other dogs on walks. So we're trying positive reinforcement. We're trying to reinforce the dog for noticing the triggers, but it just is not changing. Usually it's something wrong with the technique that I'm using there. So it's not the tool, it's the technique and the mechanics of it. And a lot of times I'll go and I'll see like the clients, using a lure, putting the treat up to the dog's nose, or they're doing things in the wrong order, or the mechanics are wrong. And if you clean those up, you don't need to go to the using those other tools as a last resort, because the last resort is fixing how you're doing the mechanics of your positive reinforcement strategy. So I think that's the bigger picture, is to really look at what you're doing and not saying, okay, we've got to jump to this right away. Look at cleaning up what you're doing now with the positive reinforcement stuff, and that is almost always your answer. And that's the nice thing about specializing too. I will say that when you do just aggression cases, and I've been doing strictly aggression cases for over a decade now, it forces you to get good at things, right? It forces you to really study, and because you got nothing else to do, right? So like if I was to go try to train agility, I wouldn't know the first thing to teach anybody. But when you get focused on one area, you start to see those little nuances in the cases that, if you just shifted that, you don't have to reach towards aversives or go down that Lima scale.
So a related question would be, what happens if food is no longer working as a motivation? Is it possible for a dog to get addicted to treats, or do I have to use treats forever, or can it downgrade to something like praise later on?
Good question. So food, we're all motivated by food, or else we'd be dead. So dogs are the same. They need food to survive, and so there's always a food motivation. The what we use, there's a lot to unpack there because you want to assess why the dog might not be motivated by food, and it's often an issue of the environment. So again, if yesterday I used that analogy, if I'm falling out of an airplane without a parachute, I could care less about the money you're giving me. And the same thing can happen for dogs. So you really want to assess, is the dog not taking food because they're just not food motivated, or is it something in the environment that is causing them not to want food at that moment? Is it the type of food I'm using? Have I really experimented with the number of treats and foods that are out there? I had one case, I was going in there with I had the best of the best. I always go in with liver and chicken and cheese and peanut butter. I always have a variety of really high value items to experiment with the dog. So I'm tossing these things. The dog's not taking any of it. And then the client says to me, well, he likes lettuce. So she goes to the fridge and gets me a head of green leaf lettuce, and I'm tossing that at the dog. And the dog's working like a charm for me for lettuce. So sometimes we have to really assess what the dog actually likes. To answer the question about is the dog always going to need treats? No, and the goal is you can use also life reinforcers. So let's say, we do it all the time. So let's say the dog's about to go for a walk and we don't want them jumping up on us and grabbing our arms. We would wait for them to give us an alternative behavior for that leash to go on. So I'm not using food there, I'm using a life reward. So you can often incorporate those. With any training, with any behavior for any animal, so dolphins, dogs, humans, it does need to be reinforced once in a while, or else it goes away. So you never technically ever get away from using some reinforcer, whether it's food or praise, if the dog likes praise, or petting, or treats, or play, or whatever it is you're using. You still have to maintain the behavior, or else it's going to go to what's called extinguishment if it's a operantly trained behavior. So we do want to remember that we want to reinforce every once in a while, and we don't want to just cut our dog's paycheck completely out of the picture. So remember that as well if you're using any kind of food. Still periodically want to reinforce the behavior.
Thanks, Mike. The next question is, are there truly unpredictable dogs? Some body language may be too subtle and short, especially to an untrained eye. Can we train a dog that usually goes from 0 to 100 to show more obvious signs of discomfort?
Yes, so good. Another good question. Such great questions. Yes, so there are some dogs, actually, I should say this, there are very few dogs that are what Ian Dunbar would refer to as a zero dog. So it gives zero signals. Almost all dogs are going to give some signal before a bite. Once you start to know what to look for, you'll start to see the subtleties. I've encountered very few zero dogs that are literally from 0 to 60. So like even Leo is giving plenty of signals before he bites. So I just want to say that there are a few of those. Most dogs are going to give some signals. Now, you can start to bring back some of the other signals if you change how the dog feels about the situation. So let's give you an example. With Leo, he now is vocalizing. So he's gone back to barking and to whining. He doesn't growl, he just whines or vocalizes much more now because he feels safe to do so. Previously, he didn't feel safe doing those things because there's a potential for punishment. So you can bring things back if you change the dog's underlying association with that environment or that context. So it can be done, and then you can reinforce desirable behaviors. It sounds strange to say I love when the growl comes back, but if that comes back, I'd be like, oh, thank you for letting me know, and I will move away or give you what you want by giving that growl, but then of course fix what I'm doing so that the dog doesn't need to growl in the first place. But yes, you can start to reinforce those behaviors, they come back. I will say that it does require a client that is somewhat savvy because the timing has to be very good, and they have to catch it happening, and you don't want to set the dog up for failure by looking to get those signals back. You just catch them if they happen and reinforce the dog in the moment they happen. So you do need a savvy handler for that, but it can be done.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Seeing that it's almost half past, maybe one last question. I am a dog trainer and have never worked with aggressive cases before. What sort of education would you recommend so I'm fully prepared to take on aggression cases?
Good question. So a few different routes. The first thing you want to try to get some sort of hands-on experience. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're just going to go grab an aggressive dog and start working with it. But you can, if you have a trainer or another trainer, somebody that has experience working in aggression cases, see if you can shadow them or mentor with them. The second thing to do is go to your local shelter or rescue or organization and volunteer to work with the dogs. And you have to do it safely, and it's going to depend on the shelter policies, of course, and who the team is. But just to volunteer, you can start again gaining trust with that shelter by working with some of the not necessarily aggressive dogs, but more of the unruly types, because that's going to teach you. There's no better place to learn handling skills than in a shelter. The best handlers that I know are the ones that have spent a long time working in shelters, and the ones handling the aggressive dogs there. They have the defensive handling skills, the leash skills, everything to keep themselves safe and others safe. So it's a great way to learn the hands-on stuff. Fostering dogs in your home, again, starting out with dogs that are not aggressive, but maybe have some slight reactivity issues or some resource guarding issues, the sort of easier cases to work with, and getting hands-on experience there. And then, of course, the educational aspect. Most of this, as we know, is online education now. So, of course, the resources I have through aggressivedog.com. But don't stop with just me. There's plenty of other wonderful trainers, Jean Donaldson, Patricia McConnell, Grisha Stewart. There's so many other people working with aggression that it's important to learn from them. Kathy Sadeo, Emma Parsons. There's just so many good trainers to learn from. So getting that educational aspect, whether it's their course or their webinar or their book that you read, that's how I learned those few things, and just reading. And believe it or not, there's not a lot of information about working with dog aggression out there. So you can literally buy every single book that's available. Literally. That's what I did my first year. I'm like, I'm going to go shopping. And I bought like as many books on aggression as I could. And you can get through them all literally within a year, because there's just not a lot of literature out there on how to work with dog aggression, at least at this point. It's getting better, but so the educational aspect is key as well. And you put it all together, and next thing you know, you're working with aggression cases.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was really insightful. I personally learned so much, and I'm sure everyone here today has the same experience. So thank you so much again for your time, and for everyone on the call today who has submitted a question. We've come to the end of our webinar on the science of animal behavior, and we hope that everyone has had an insightful learning experience on changing aggressive behavior in dogs. Head over to our Facebook page, Animal Blast SG, for more educational information on animal ethology, and like the page for regular content. If you did not manage to catch today and yesterday's session, you may also view it live by visiting the NParks SG YouTube page or scanning and saving the QR code below. Thank you once again, Mike, for your time. Have a good day. And thank you everyone else who joined us today. Have a good night.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.